Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
What's your problem with the public schools?
Nothing. Nothing at all. You know, we just want our children at home, really.
Sam Shippey, his two brothers, and their wives spent their 13th day in jail today, while the three couples' children remain at home and out of school. Sam Shippey's 7-year-old daughter spent part of today writing a letter to her mother in jail. Tonight we'll look at this increasingly celebrated case where an Idaho family is defying state law about sending their children to school. Good evening. Just how far can the state go in its efforts to assure that children are properly educated? Just what is the state's legitimate interest in the education of children? Who is to decide what makes for adequate schooling? Should the state decide? Should parents decide? All of those questions are being played out right now, not in some theoretical discussion in a political science or education classroom, but in a courtroom and in a jail cell in Payette County. Three brothers, all of them named Shippey, and their wives are in jail tonight, still refusing to acknowledge that the state has a responsibility to require that either their children attend a public school or a private or approved homeschool that meets certain state standards. The Shippey case is drawing a lot of attention, beyond the borders of Idaho now. We'll be focusing on it tonight, hearing shortly on tape from one of the Shippey brothers. We'll also be discussing the situation later with State School Superintendent Jerry Evans and with State Representative Bob Forey, among others. Yesterday, about 50 members of the close-knit Shippey family filed quietly into the Payette County Courthouse, where 16 of the family's school-aged children pleaded innocent to charges of truancy. The arraignment of the children follows the jailing of their parents on November 15th. The parents had failed to obey a court order that they provide approved schooling for their children. The children were scheduled to go back to court again next week. If the children are found next week to have been truant, the court could order them placed in a foster home or in a state institution. Idaho law requires all children, or I should say all parents, to educate their children from ages 7 through 16 in, again, either a public or approved home or private school. The Shippeys have rejected that notion almost completely, saying that they should decide what kind of education their children receive. Producer Gary Richardson talked in jail today to one of the Shippey brothers, Sam Shippey.
2 years ago, we had a private school. I mean, we went into the state and got a certificate for a private school, Black Canyon Private School, and we thought that we was doing it legally. We always kind of never did want to send our children, to school really. And then so we took them out, and then they took us to court, and they won, and we sent them back. And we felt like we never feel good about the decision we made, and they went for 2 years.
Shippey explained that before the family's 2-year probation was up, they pulled the children out of school again after receiving an order to appear in court.
Why aren't you willing to work out something with the superintendent, an acceptable program at home?
Oh, I don't know. The deal they had that they sent out, we could never have done it anyway.
Why is that?
Well, I had to have accredited teachers and proper desks, proper lighting, everything like that, which we don't have. Nobody that went to school far enough, to teach them at home. They wouldn't have. We asked them to approve the school, but they didn't. Took it into the school board.
Some people argue that by doing this, you're depriving the kids of skills that they really need to succeed in this society.
I mean, to me, unless I prove an unfit parent, first I should be proven an unfit parent, it would be my decision, same as it is each parent's decision, to raise his own children. But they haven't proven that yet, that our children are going to be deficient or improper for society, to live in it.
Of course, the law doesn't say that they have to. The law says you have to send the kids to school.
That's all it is, yeah. It isn't. But if they check the records, those last 2 years, and they'll see that it wasn't no good sending them by force, the biggest percent of our children were flunking. Some of the grade schools were doing better, but we didn't do it because we wanted to. The children didn't go because they wanted to, It was just forced deal, a forced attendance is all it is, you know. And it wasn't so bad sending them before when we thought we had to, but when we sent them to stay out of jail, it was really hard, you know, because of fear of going to jail. You know, then it was awful hard to live with.
Do you object to what they're being taught in the schools?
Oh, not much, no. Well, probably some of it I would if I knew, you know, but I don't really, no, not much, you know. I don't consider it important, you know, schooling, like most people would.
What do you consider important for your kids?
Oh, to be good, you know, really. That's what we strive most for, to be, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, you know. And just good children, more good morals, you know. And I've got 4 daughters married now, you know. Just work for their own living, you know.
Would you say that there's a religious motivation behind what you're doing?
Oh, yes, yeah. You know, it tells a father to raise his children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You know, so
Pardon me, say that again.
To raise up his children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, I believe that's how it puts it, you know. And it'd have to be my decision then, you know, how to raise them, should be, you know, not the law, unless I proved, you know, that I abused my children or whatever, you know. Should be first, looks like to me anyway.
Shippey says even if the state takes custody of the children, he won't change his mind about sending them to school.
There ain't no other way to go for us, you know. I mean, we tried the other way, you know, doing it by force, you know, and it didn't seem right. And this way, at least, we're doing what we believe is right. You know, and I mean, it ain't pleasant by a long ways.
Later, we visited the Shippey home near New Plymouth, where 4 of Sam Shippey's married daughters are taking care of the children who are out of school, including an infant who was taken from her nursing mother when she was jailed 2 weeks ago.
If you don't think the state has good enough schools, then I don't see how they could be good enough to approve your school if they aren't a good enough. But I think they should have the right to see if they could teach them better at home, and then if they couldn't, to send them back. I think if they took them and put them in a foster home, it would be a bad misuse of foster homes, because they were designed for abused and neglected and homeless children, and as you can probably see, these kids aren't that. They, you know, I think a family is more important than an education.
Again, those interviews were videotaped earlier today. For more on the Shippey situation and its potential impact on other families in Idaho who might feel the same way about the public schools as the Shippeys do, we hear first tonight from State School Superintendent Jerry Evans and from Michael Jacobson, the Superintendent of Schools in New Plymouth. Mr. Evans, let me ask you first, just as succinctly as you can, tell me what the issue is here.
I guess the issue is compulsory attendance. The state has a law that requires of parents that children be educated either in the public schools, in a private or parochial school, or in a program of home instruction that has been found comparable by the local Board of Trustees. And that is the law, and I'm sure that is the force that has caused the New Plymouth School District to act as they have.
Mr. Shippey says he should decide what's good for his kids, not you or not me or the local school board. He should decide. What do you say to that?
Well, there's certainly no claim that the children belong to the state. I would be very much in error if I were to express that. Children do have some rights as children. They have the opportunity, or should have the opportunity, to receive those things that will prepare them for some kind of a useful and productive life. You know, we go back in some constitutional language in terms of the stability of a republican form of government being dependent upon an informed and educated citizenry. So these concerns about making sure that young people have opportunities to secure a reasonable kind of education go way back in our history.
And that's the state's overriding interest in this matter.
That's right.
Okay. Mr. Jacobson, I know you, perhaps more than anyone else, are responsible for bringing this issue to a head, so to speak. What, the law aside here for a moment, and what the state law says about these children being educated, what is your concern about these particular children and their education?
They weren't not receiving an education. That was my concern. Mr. Shippey has alluded to the fact that he had a home school, that the Shippeys incorporated a Black Canyon private school, but in fact that was name only. There was no academic education being taken place in their homes. They were teaching the children vocational education, the same vocations that the Shippeys themselves are involved in: farming, land leveling, homemaking, things such as that.
In a nutshell, the boys were being taught how to drive tractors and Caterpillar tractors, and the girls were being taught how to cook and clean and take care of the kids, right?
That's basically what it was. And as Superintendent Evans has stated, this is a limiting factor on the children. If they want to go into one of those professions, that's fine. But if they don't want to go into those professions, they're not capable of going into something else. Also, if they don't work for the family, I think they'd have a very difficult time holding a job working for someone else when all the exposure they've had is work with the family.
He said on that videotape you just saw a moment ago that he couldn't have met the standards that are required of him because his education is not adequate. At least that was his interpretation of it. What do you say to that? Could he have met the requirements if he'd tried in good faith to meet the requirements as you see them?
No question about that. We do have a guideline for exemption from educating their kids in the public schools. We do have another home school in the school district that has met the requirements. They've worked with us. We know what they're doing, their methods of instruction, their place of instruction, their hours of instruction. They provide us with testing information which guarantees the progress of their children. It's not hard to meet some minimum standards. In the Shippey case, they weren't willing to work with us in any respect.
Of course, Mr. Evans, one person's minimum standards is another person's coercion. One person's adequate education is might be land leveling, and someone else's might be being able to recite Shakespeare. Where do we draw the line there between who decides and what is an adequate education?
Again, we go back to the law. The responsibility for the education of children rests upon the parents to see that they're educated. And that can be satisfied by enrolling them in the public schools, in the private or parochial schools, or in that comparable program. And our law is very specific in that it says the local board of trustees must determine that the program of instruction is comparable with that instruction that's being provided in the local school district. The subjects include at least those that are commonly taught in the public schools, and the duration of time is the same as that is required in the local public schools. So we have provided a judgment to be made by 5 elected school trustees to make that judgment whether this program that is being provided by the home, by the family, is comparable with that is offered in the school.
Gentlemen, just quickly, I would assume that as we sit here tonight, this is not what you wanted to have happen, though, ultimately. The parents in jail, the kids still not in school, possibly facing being taken away from their parents by the state. There seem to be no winners here, Mr. Jacobson.
There are no winners, no question about that. And I think the biggest losers of all have been the kids. They really have gone through a troublesome 2 years where they get encouragement. They're motivated at school by teachers to learn, and they get the idea from home that academic learning is worthless. I don't want to hear what you're doing. That's, I think, one of the reasons Mr.
So the kids really have suffered.
Kids have suffered. Yeah.
We'll come back, gentlemen. Let's get another view of this now from State Representative Bob Forey of Nampa and from Larry Olson, who heads the Idaho Family Education Association. Representative Forey, are the Shippeys right, are they wrong, or are they a little bit of both in this case?
Well, I think the Shippeys are right. We have a classic constitutional question here. I might say Superintendent Evans is almost right in the way he quotes the law. He says the school board must determine comparability. The Idaho Code says the school board may determine comparability. So it isn't quite as strong a word, and they don't have to get as involved sometimes as some of them like to, and that is the question. An education based on whose standards? And the constitutional aspect, and I think it's very, very glaring, is religious freedom. This family has made this decision based on their religious convictions. Now, not preference, but conviction. And these are deep-rooted convictions of these people. My Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And I don't know how any one of us can step in and judge what their religious conviction and and the way they want to handle their family could be.
So in this case, the parents really do, in your view, have the right to decide what kind of education their children receive, and even if that's no education, that's...
Well, now, in this case, now this is not typical. I want to say that there's no doubt if these were kids that were running wild, had appeared before this judge, and been in trouble, and been on probation, and had problems, I would stand behind them 100%. But these children are being educated.
Right, I want you to make that distinction in a moment, but let's talk about this case. In this case, the parents, in your view, do have this right and responsibility.
Right. Now, Mr. Shippey tells me that he does want his children to learn to read, and he'll teach them to read because he thinks it's vital that they learn to read Scripture. That's part of their life, and they must learn to read Scripture. He needs them to learn to figure. They have to learn math because they help him on land leveling. They have to learn to read grade stakes. They have to know how much to cut and to fill, and that's vital to him. They need to know the metric system and using wrenches and tools. And this is what he shares with me, that you know, my kids have to know these things, and I'm going to teach them.
Just in a word or two, in this case, the parents have a right, as you see it, that is superior to the right that the state has,
Absolutely.
as Mr. Evans articulated it earlier, to have an informed, educated citizen.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Olson, I know you've taught your children at home in the past,
yes,
right?
I have. Mm-hmm.
Do you sympathize with the Shippies?
I think I do. I'm not well acquainted with the case, but what little I do know, it appears that they're getting a lot of experiential learning, which I'm very much in favor of. I would like to say that this is not a typical case of homeschooling problems, and my work has been in the homeschooling movement in the state of Idaho.
How is it not typical?
Well, I think some of the statements that have come out that they do not have an approved program has raised some questions which will affect us in our organization, and that is who decides what's approved and what isn't. Mr. Evans says that the local school board does this. My question in this case is what kind of precedent is it going to set for a school board to determine the comparability of education in this case as compared to what they're going to have to put in as effort in determining comparability in other cases in the state, because we have hundreds in the state.
Hundreds of parents families who are teaching their children at home.
Right.
Well, how did it work in your particular case? Did you go to the school board and say, this is what we're planning to do, and they approve it?
We studied our rights before we did this, and we informed the school board that we were going to do this. We did not ask permission, and that's a vital point. We made this decision on our own. We did not ask permission. We just informed them that we were going to do it. We did provide a good education for our children, and the school board was cooperative. I still question, in my mind, how much real effort was put into determining the comparability in this case that we're talking about today, however. Did the school board go out and see them leveling the land and using the math and the metric system? Did they really determine just how much experiential learning is of value as compared to what we would call classroom teaching? I maintain that there's a strong comparison between the two.
Okay, I want to open it up, but I want to ask Mr. Forey one more question. I would assume that you're upset by the fact that these folks are in jail over this.
Not really, because they don't seem to be too upset. I offered my assistance, asked what I could do, and he said, well, really nothing. And I guess I'm frustrated that they weren't willing to take some action, and I think, like the prosecutor said, the key is in their hand, but they just simply are sitting there. They won't ask for help, or they won't appeal the decision, and so there's really nothing anybody can do but wait until they're ready to take some action. I would support them, I suspect, if they did, but there's really nothing to do until they're ready to ask for help.
Let's open it up. I invite you gentlemen to get back in whenever it strikes you as appropriate. Let me go back first to Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Olson raises a question about just what the local school board did to see whether there was an adequate or inadequate education in this case. What did the school board do?
The only contact the school board had was through me. I was their representative going out to the location of the Black Canyon School. And as I stated earlier, the response from the Shippies was, "It's none of your business," when I tried to question what was going on out there. They made no effort, and in fact they refused to provide any information for us to make a evaluation of comparability. Therefore, the only evaluation that could be made is by my observations of what was taking place the day I visited there.
Well, let's go to the heart of what seems to be the part of the controversy here, as I see it anyway. Who decides what is an adequate education? Mr. Evans, you obviously said the school board decides based on what kind of criteria?
Basically, Mark, the criteria that the school board must use is what's going on in that local school district. We do not have a state-adopted set of criteria that any one of these home instruction or homeschool programs must meet. The law simply provides the opportunity for those who wish to educate their children in that third option, the opportunity to present to the school board sufficient information so they can make the judgment that it's a comparable program. And you'll find a number of school boards in our state that have been very willing to work with parents, and parents very willing to work with the school boards as well. And when they're satisfied that the program of instruction is reasonably comparable, the subjects that are commonly taught, and those are the classes that we're talking about, arithmetic and reading, there's really no argument about those. Those classes that are commonly taught are being taught, and the duration of time is about the same as in the school district. Those boards have been willing to say, fine.
What's wrong with that, Mr. Foray or Mr. Olson?
Well, I guess I have a little problem when I look at the public school system and look at figures from the National Department of Education that we're wasting in time, using a lot of time that should be devoted to the public school system, the children that are in that school. When we have a 12% illiteracy, functional illiteracy rate, when a third of our kids are dropping out of high school because of problems and that aren't being solved there, here's a family raising children to be good citizens who will not accept welfare, who are asking for nothing. They're not going to be a burden on society. They're functional, and yet we spend our time worrying about them, trying to mind their business. They'll never be lawbreakers. They have a good record, and yet we're letting these kids fail in school and not paying attention to those that are in the school building itself.
Mr. Foray speaks for a lot of people, Mr. Jacobson, who feel that way.
No doubt about it. A lot of people have contacted me with the same views. And it is true that, I as an administrator, our principals spend a great deal of time on non-productive, non-learning experiences. Our high school principal probably spends 80% of his time in just discipline, truancy-related matters. Is no help to the kids that want to be in school. And that is a problem with compulsory education, because you have to address the needs of kids who really don't want to be there.
Mr. Olson, do you buy Mr. Evans's contention that the state has some legitimate interest in an informed citizenry, that in order to have the society function at the level that it functions, that people have to be competent at certain things, and that there must be some measurement of that competence?
I think there's no question that every individual has that same responsibility as well as the state. But the question I have is the degree in which the state can step in and determine that comparability based upon standards that are commonly taught in the public system, which I think research will prove is not really the best system. And if families can provide an atmosphere and an educational philosophy that works, as it seems to be working in the case of these families in jail, then I think the state ought to be able to look at these situations independently and make a determination that's favorable.
Well, Mr. Jacobson said, though, he's not sure that it is working, as I heard him. And they wouldn't even let him take a look to see whether it was.
Well, here again, you have the sanctity of the home, and I think this is one of the great issues that's going to be foremost in this nation with regard to education in the home. That how much right does the state have, or how much right did this superintendent have to walk onto their property and assess their situation without even being invited in the first place? And you know, there may be even some laws broken there. I don't know, but it's an agonizing question.
Mr. Jacobson?
I don't see where any laws were broken with me out visiting their house. They didn't threaten to throw me off the property or anything. I told them that you know, I was representing the school board and was interested in what learning was taking place at their place. And,
I mean, basically, it seems to me, and just viewing that videotape, that it comes down, these are nice people. I would assume they treated you with the kind of courtesy that they treated our people who talked to them today. They just have a very different view of the philosophy here.
That's true.
Basically what it comes down to.
That's basically what it comes down to.
Well, Mark, as we talk about competency and who has to force this standard on anybody, in a free country, I should be able to do what I please, when I please, as long as I don't step on your turf or violate somebody else's right. I have no right to do that. But, and these people get accused that if we don't force our method onto them and make them do what we think they should do, they may be wards of the state and be, you know, a burden to society on welfare. The NEA is advocating in one of their resolutions in the public schools to inform parents of the availability of discount buying through federal food stamp programs to assist them to understand its eligibility requirements. We're advocating teaching kids in public school how to get on welfare. Here's a family that says, no thanks, we won't take it. And they're teaching their children, we don't live in a welfare state, you're going to stand on your own 2 feet.
Mr. Evans wants to get a word in on that.
Mark, it really troubles me when we try to inject a National Teachers Union's resolution into this situation in New Plymouth. Those are simply irrelevant kinds of statements in this particular situation. What troubles me more than anything is we have a very uncomfortable set of circumstances for a number of us, but we are attempting to follow the law as it has been provided by our own legislature in this state. What troubles me even more is if these folks, who appear to be good people, I don't discount that at all, but if these folks sit out that 6 months jail sentence and then return to their homes and have their children with them again, the law has not been changed unless the legislature chooses to do so. And again, if it comes to the attention of that school board that children of school age are not being educated in one of the 3 provisions, then you go right back and they're required to file a petition with the court again.
Should we change the law, Mr. Forey?
Well, I tried last time and we'll probably try again. I think we must look at this.
We shouldn't change the law in your view, Mr. Evans.
I think it's a reasonable law. I think there are some tough judgments that have to be made. I happen to have a lot of faith in local school boards. I think those people who are elected locally by the people who live there have the opportunity to make the most reasonable judgments.
Well, I'm sure there'll be more talking about it. I wish we had more time to talk about it. Mr. Evans and Mr. Jacobson, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Representative Forey and Mr. Olson, thank you, gentlemen. That is our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.